Chapter 2. The Viking helmet was a first. Racing legend Robert Redball Redding thought he'd seen every screwball getup a race fan could wear. But the genius in line at the infield beer stand had proven him wrong by gluing a squirrel's hide and two curved dildos onto a mixing bowl, creating a reasonable facsimile of ancient Nordic headwear. It wasn't until Robert was a few feet away that he realized the horns had rubber foreskin and penis heads that jiggled as the guy staggered toward the Pabst Blue Ribbon vendor. "Is that what I think it is?" Robert asked his golf cart traveling companion, Stockcar president Miles Hinton. "Oh, hell," Hinton said as he spotted the dick hat. "Think we'll see him at the outreach service? Not if security sees him first." Miles unsheathed the walkie-talkie from his belt and barked Penis Vikings coordinates over the airways. The hat would belong to the Alabama Motor Speedway in a matter of minutes. As their EZ Go rolled past the concession stand, Eric took one last look at the long queue and saw a sign on the back of Penis Vikings mixing bowl. It read, "What jet wears at home?" Now it made sense. The helmet was another in a long line, Domi Unul, of gay jokes aimed at stock car driver Jet Jordan, the defending champion here at the Alabama Motor Speedway. "Is Jet still dating Veronica?" Robert asked. Jet, the most successful active driver in American auto racing and one of Robert Redding's closest friends, put up with guys like Penis Viking questioning his sexual orientation every week. Already this morning, Robert had seen one hand-painted sign in the infield that read, "Jet blows more than engines," and another in the grandstands that simply said, "Face it, Jet's a homo." The fact that Jet's girlfriend was a jaw-dropping model either didn't register with these boobs or it didn't matter. Never let the facts get in the way of a good joke. "She slept in his motor coach last night," Miles said. "Did you know she's the most downloaded underwear model in the world? Just jumped past that lanky Brazilian girl, Gazelle, or whatever the hell her name is." "Proud of that, is she?" "I sure would be." Miles was a big man. The thought of him being photographed in his underwear made Robert Redding shudder. "You'd figure the divorce would have put an end to the gay stuff," Robert said. Jet's divorce from Brandy Jordan had been tabloid fodder for the better part of a year. The gay jokes died down during that time, but no more. "Did he show you the latest website?" Miles asked. "I've never seen him laugh so hard." Jet couldn't wait to show Robert his latest anti-fan website, jjordanisahomo.com. The homepage had a cutout of Jet's face plastered on the oily body of a gay porn star, engaged in the kinds of activities that spawned Supreme Court rulings. Jet and Veronica thought it was hilarious. "It's funny that the guys who put this crap out are the same ones who jerk off to pictures of my girlfriend," Jet had said. Miles whipped the cart down a makeshift gravel path, through the infield campground. The grandstands at Alabama Motor Speedway were an hour from filling up, but the infield had been packed and the party roaring at full throttle since sundown on Friday. Bus-sized RVs were wedged next to each other onto the grass like sows at a trough. Fancier rolling units with S-slide outside panel sand hydraulic canopies had squeezed into their assigned spots like obese airline passengers in middle seats. Even the stripped and painted school buses were sandwiched so close together that a kid with a daredevil streak could have run along the rooftops from turn 1 to turn 3 without ever touching the ground. The motor coaches belonging to the drivers and team owners' million-dollar homes on wheels with cheery paneling and multiple plasma high-def entertainment centers, too posh to be called recreational. Vehicles were segregated from the cloth-top campers and T-trailer hitch Airstreamsby and E8-foot chain-link fence. But there was no more space in the VIP lot than in the fan campground, and in some cases the drivers and team owners were more cramped than the public. At least in the general admit section, 3 families could buy 4 spots and configure their Fleetwoods into a 3-sided U, leaving room in the interior for a barbecue smoker and horseshoe pit. The first RV to catch Robert's eye was a tricked-out Winnebago with chrome stovepipe manifold exhausts, spinner rims, and Lollapalooza-sized Bose stereo speakers blaring AC/DC. Rock and roll ain't noise pollution. Rock and roll ain't gonna die. The owner held a Corona as his left hand while putting T-bones on the grill with his right. It was in 9:45 in the morning. "You've got to give Penis Viking a gold star for creativity," Robert said as they sped past the concession stand. "I'll pass that along to the mothers who complain." Miles whipped the cart down a makeshift gravel path through the infield campground. The grandstands at Alabama Motor Speedway were an hour from filling up, but the infield had been packed and the party roaring at full throttle since sundown on Friday. Bus-sized RVs were wedged next to each other onto the grass like sows at a trough. Fancier rolling units with S-slide outside panel sand hydraulic canopies had squeezed into their assigned spots like obese airline passengers in middle seats. Even the stripped and painted school buses were sandwiched so close together that a kid with a daredevil streak could have run along the rooftops from turn 1 to turn 3 without ever touching the ground. The motor coaches belonging to the drivers and team owners' million-dollar homes on wheels with cheery paneling and multiple plasma high-def entertainment centers, too posh to be called recreational. Vehicles were segregated from the cloth-top campers and T-trailer hitch Airstreamsby and E8-foot chain-link fence. But there was no more space in the VIP lot than in the fan campground, and in some cases the drivers and team owners were more cramped than the public. At least in the general admit section, 3 families could buy 4 spots and configure their Fleetwoods into a 3-sided U, leaving room in the interior for a barbecue smoker and horseshoe pit. The first RV to catch Robert's eye was a tricked-out Winnebago with chrome stovepipe manifold exhausts, spinner rims, and Lollapalooza-sized Bose stereo speakers blaring AC/DC, rock and roll ain't noise pollution, rock and roll ain't gonna die. The owner held a Corona, is his left hand while putting T-bones on the grill with his right. It was in 9:45 in the morning. "Hey, Red Ball!" the fan yelled over the music as Robert and Miles puttered by. The man dropped his grill tongs, raised his beer, and grinned. "Lock up the bad boys, Red Ball." "You the man?" Robert gave his best Miss America wave as Miles gunned the golf cart through the maze of RVs. 30 more campers yelled greetings along this single stretch of gravel. Many of the gray-haired fans, of which there were plenty, remembered Robert from his days behind the wheel of the Union 76 Chevrolet when he won 4 Salem Cup championships. The youngsters in the crowd knew him from the movie Hot Laps that had opened nationwide on Friday and was a runaway box office hit. The hero of the film was none other than former Stockcar champion Robert Red Ball Redding, who had become a crime-busting prosecutor after retiring from the rigors of racing. Robert's mug had appeared on every entertainment show and in every PR puff piece the studio could place. A month ago, most of the race fans under 40 wouldn't have known Robert if he'd bumped into them at the beer stand. Now he was a bigger draw than some of the active drivers. The biggest reception Robert received in the infield came from half a dozen kids who had hauled 500 pounds of sand, a couple of palm trees, an inflatable kiddie pool, and a 40-inch Hitachi flat screen to the top of their overland RV, creating one heck of a rooftop beach party. All 6 partiers stood and cheered as the great Red Ball Redding slow-rolled past them in a 2-cycle golf cart. "Good to see they haven't forgotten you," Miles said. Robert caught a final glimpse of the beach party just as one of the girls removed her shirt to reveal a flesh-colored bikini top with Jet Jordan's car number 25 positioned at the nipple ends of the fabric. "That's Hollywood," Robert said. "Those kids never saw me drive a lap. How you feel about that?" "How do I feel about that?" "What, are you auditioning for Dr. Phil?" "Sorry," Miles said. "I've never been this close to a real live movie hero before. Go to hell." Miles took a sharper than needed turn through the chain-link gates that parceled the garage area of the infield off from the masses. But the partition didn't lessen the congestion. If anything, the pre-race garage area had more people per square foot than the campground. Thousands of sponsors, corporate guests, media members, and fans who were willing to pay a premium for pit passes pushed, pulled, and elbowed their way through the 2-acre garage area like Christmas shoppers at Walmart. Miles blew the horn on the cart and kept his foot on the accelerator. Garage road rules: if you're in an official vehicle and you blow your horn, you have the right of way. Of course, race cars don't have horns, so the teams who actually work in the garages have different rules. As Miles and Robert discovered when Mudfish Dupree's over, the wall crew pushed the Browning forward onto the asphalt right in front of Miles's golf cart. Tires screeched as Miles locked up the EZ Go. Robert put a foot on the dash and dug his fingernails into the upholstery. After a second of watching the crew maneuver the Ford into the tech inspection line, Miles brought up the subject he'd been meaning to get to all morning. "So," he said to Robert, "you think you can go down to Mississippi and check out that little situation for us?" Robert expelled a noisy sigh and looked up at the filling grandstands. Then he said, "Miles, I've got a lot of cases I'm working on right now. I don't have time to go to Michael's baseball games, much less." I know, Miles said. "And I wouldn't want to create an impression of impropriety, you being a friend and all. But if it didn't interfere with anything, you wouldn't have a problem checking out that problem for us, would you?" "If I checked anything out, it would be for the Justice Department," Robert said. "They pay my salary these days." "Well, I wouldn't want to jeopardize your salary," Miles said. Robert hid his smile by turning toward the Browning team's garage. Money was not one of Red Ball's problems. He had made a mint as a driver before retiring to go to law school. He'd taken a job as a North Carolina prosecutor to fulfill a promise he'd made to his mother, and a few years later he was elected state attorney in a landslide. A few years after that, the president and attorney general asked him to become a federal prosecutor. Every penny of the salary he now earned as chief prosecutor of the 6th District of the United States went to the Robert Redding Foundation, a nonprofit he and his wife Melissa had set up to help hearing-impaired children. Miles Hinton knew this. Miles also knew that Robert's U.S. Department of Justice paycheck wouldn't cover the taxes on his mansion in Charlotte, much less the upkeep on the condo in Park City and cottage on St. Croix. The jeopardize your salary comment was Miles's way of telling Robert not to try that above-my-pay-grade poor civil servant bullshit on his old friends. "Okay," Robert said. "I'll find out what I can, but I don't know what good it'll do. Some kook blew himself up trying to sabotage a bridge. I'm just a lawyer. The Bureau and Homeland Security are all over it. Yeah, well, we've committed $80 million to one end of that bridge, and we break ground on Tuesday. If a bird takes a dump on the pilings, I want to know about it." "Send somebody down," Robert said. "The FBI will be very helpful. Field agents can tell you everything you want to know." Miles had plenty of people on the scene, and Robert knew it. Roger English Jr., heir to Street Track and Oval Course Championship auto racing Stockcar, and majority shareholder in Speedway Properties, Inc., had perfected the art of PR rapid response. Anybody who knew the English family knew that Roger had had a team of investigators, lawyers, and well-groomed and literate spokespeople in Biloxi before the full complement of Litchwick body parts washed ashore. Stockcar had a lot of money invested in developing DeBarrow Island, the landmass that was to be connected to mainland Mississippi by the Point Oceanez Bridge. No way would the most powerful people in American auto racing allow local press to run willy-nilly through the Delta without a guiding hand. Roger English and his trusty chief executive, Miles Hinton, were all over this potential PR brushfire. "So, you'll make some calls?" Miles asked. Robert slumped in the seat. "I'll do what I can." The Browning crew pushed the car out of the way, and Miles gunned the golf cart toward a low-rise block building between the garages and Victory Lane. Robert held onto the seat until his knuckles cramped. Another gaggle of fans, 20 or so, being escorted through the garage area by a well-dressed tour guide holding a sign announcing them as being with Nationwide. "Insurance," yelled greetings to Red Ball as they rolled past a couple of security checkpoints. Miles blew the horn and kept the cart moving at full speed. Several drivers jumped as Miles locked the brakes and slid the cart to a stop outside the brick building. "You suck as a passenger," Miles said to Robert. "Is it that obvious?" "Oh no, everybody digs fingernails into the upholstery when I drive." Robert stayed seated in case Miles, who had lost a lot of weight but still tipped the scales at more than 250 pounds, needed a push. The big guy tugged the steering wheel and rocked back and forth to gain momentum. One big heave later, Miles hoisted his frame upright. Only then did Robert take his foot off the dash. Before he could get out of the cart, a hand landed on Robert's shoulder, and he almost jumped off the seat. "Damn, Red Ball. Jumpy this morning?" Robert turned and looked into the smirking, freckled face of Junior Senior Jr., Stockcar's most popular driver. Junior wore a black golf shirt, jeans, and Oakley's most expensive sunglasses. The cap covering his red hair advertised Thick Century Fox's latest release, Hot Laps, a true story. Robert stood, shook Junior's hand, and pointed to the hat. "You selling movie tickets now?" he asked. "It's a one-race deal." Junior's primary sponsor, Jack Daniel's Distillery, had been more than happy to relinquish their rights to the hood of the No. 7 Chevrolet this Sunday. It had only cost Fox $1 million in product placement and promotional tie-ins. "I'm a 01 race deal too," Robert said, only he was a little cheaper. Junior grinned, showing off the newly whitened caps on his incisors. "Would you be here if it wasn't for the movie?" "Not likely," Robert said. Hot Laps was exceeding all the analysts' expectations, in part because it was a family movie about duty, loyalty, and commitments to right and wrong. Exactly the kind of vagaries that qualified it for foreign film status in Hollywood. The film chronicled the real-life crime-fighting exploits of Junior Senior Jr. and Robert Red Ball Redding. The true part in the title was what movie folks like to call a reimagining, which meant that most of the movie was bullshit. While serving as a prosecutor in North Carolina, Robert had indeed fallen face first into a case involving car thieves, money laundering, murder, mayhem, and the Seniors, auto racing's most famous family. It was also true that the case had turned on pure dumb luck and the fact that the bad guys had the combined IQ of a gopher. That hadn't slowed Hollywood. Dennis Quaid played Robert as a savant superstar of the speedway and the courtroom, while Jude Law portrayed Junior as an emotionally deep hero who overcomes self-doubt and psychological scarring after his famous racing father's untimely death. On film, Junior Senior Jr., a brooding hunk with a heart of gold, puts self-interest aside and leads the charge to defeat the villains. In reality, Junior's role had been minor. His family had been involved in some shenanigans, and Junior had cooperated with investigators. The fact that Junior had insisted on script approval before dropping 24 lawsuits did more to change the dynamics of the film than any Hollywood creative licensing. Truth be damned, the movie was a hit. Junior was a star. And Robert Redding got to spend a Sunday afternoon in Pell City, Alabama, waving to scantily clad fans and watching waves of heat rise off a 2-mile oval racetrack. Miles breathed heavily as he waddled over and shook Junior's hand. Driving a golf cart had winded Big Miles. "You guys ready?" Miles asked in a way that didn't require an answer. Junior nodded and led the way. A couple of sawhorses had been erected as a barricade outside the building, and a pimple-faced Pinkerton guard kept gawkers at bay. 43 drivers filed through the door of the building. Mudfish Dupree and his crew chief, Limp Dorsey, arrived in a zebra-striped golf cart with oversized oof road tires. Tony Swagger, the least popular driver on the circuit, snuck in a back door by himself. Piston Stackius, one of the young guns on the stock car scene, shared a joke with veteran driver Bo Pickett as they walked inside. None of the drivers wore race suits. It was way too early in the day for that, but all had similar outfits. Wrangler jeans, Oxford broadcloth shirts, caps, and dark glasses, the unofficial uniform of the pre-race driver. Robert veered away from the crowd and trotted toward the men's room at the rear of the building. Miles's driving had literally scared the pee out of him. Robert could hear a Jimmy Buffett guitar riff coming from a large stage near the Victory Lane. This was ABC's first televised race of the year, and they had booked Buffett to lead the telecast. The green flag was 2 hours away, but Jimmy always gave the Pirate heads their money's worth. The crowd went into heebie-jeebies when Jimmy cleared his throat and said, "How's everybody doing?" Robert found himself tapping his toe and humming the tune to License to Chill as he sidled up to the metal urinal. "Too much coffee?" a voice said from near the door. Robert glanced over in time to see Jet Jordan unzip his fly. He looked away before Jet unsheathed Veronica's tether. "Yeah," Robert said, in answer to Jet's question. "You had a good morning?" "Had a woman break down in sobs when I signed her hat at a breakfast meet and greet." "Is that a first?" "Like this it was," Jet said. "I've had a few tear up, but this gal went Tammy Faye Backer on us. They had to sit her down and put a paper bag over her mouth. You charmer, you." "Speaking of charmers, I saw your daughter this morning." You threatened any teenage boys yet? One a week, Robert said. Robert's daughter, Katie Redding, age 15, had blossomed into a nubile young woman, and every hormone-arranging high school stud had noticed. His little girl was now the star tutor for every football player struggling with sophomore trig, even though Katie was a stone-deaf lip reader. Robert showed off his concealed firearm permit and pointed out to every boy who showed up these days the room in his house where he'd killed a man. This had chilled an already frosty relationship between Robert and his daughter. Did my family fill you in on their morning plans? Robert asked Jet as both men finished their business. Melissa said she'd see me at the outreach service. I assume she'll see you there too. Robert hoped Melissa was hurrying. The thought of Penis Viking and his ilk ogling his wife and daughter made him pine for the high school boys who chased Katie through the halls of Davidson Christian Academy. He thanked Jet and nodded to the guard on his way out. Then Robert slipped into the back of the main room and found a vacant spot near the corner. Jet came in a second later and slid into an empty folding chair in the second row next to his teammate, Bobby Camber. Bobby was the current point leader in the race for the Salem Cup Championship. Jet nipped at his bumper, standing only 30 points behind, a scenario that had the racing world abuzz with speculation. Jet owned half of Bobby's car and half of his own. Don Healy, the current king of Stockcar owners, owned the other halves. None of the drivers had asked Bobby how he planned to race the guy who owned his car down the stretch, but the question hovered like an exhaust cloud over every track. This was the first time in Stockcar history that a driver and his owner had fought for the championship. Would they drive as teammates? Would Bobby yield to the guy who signed his paychecks? What would happen if they were neck and neck in the final race of the year? Internet chat rooms and AM radio talk shows buzzed with speculation. Miles called the weekly pre-race drivers meeting to order. A slew of fans crowded the small area behind the seats, thrilled by the prospect of watching their favorite stock car driver pick his nose and fidget in an uncomfortable folding chair while listening to Miles give pre-race instructions for the umpteenth time. You been here long? A familiar voice said from behind. Robert turned, smiled, and put his arm around his wife, Melissa Redding. Just got here, he said. The kids weren't far behind. Don Healy, the kingpin, car owner who had once taken a chance on a young upstart driver named Robert Redding, walked in with his hand on young Michael Redding's shoulder. 2 steps behind Don, Katie Redding slinked in, rolling her eyes and cocking her hip to convey her utter boredom. Everything bored Katie these days. School, home, the television shows they watched, the trips they took, even the Caribbean left her stupefied. Her best friends from a year ago had become insufferable goobers, and she hated her parents' tastes in food, music, literature, clothing, art, architecture, hairstyle, and acquaintances. She even hated her name, insisting she be called Catherine, or Katerina, or Monique, anything but Katie. How's Miss Attitude? Robert asked his wife. I heard that, Katie signed to her father. She's okay, Melissa said. I'm bored out of my skull, Katie signed. And I'm starving. You didn't eat? Robert signed, communicating with. The deaf was easy in settings like this. The room fell silent just in time for everyone to hear Jimmy belt out the chorus of Cheeseburger in Paradise. Miles ignored the music, cleared his throat, and launched into a speech about the speed limit on the pit road and the penalties for gaining advantage below the line. Junior yawned and stretched. Mudfish was the first to insert a finger in a nostril. No, I didn't eat, Katie signed. All they had was ham. Ham in the eggs, ham in the grits, ham in the biscuits. They even cooked ham in the muffins. Welcome to Alabama. A year ago, Katie would have scoffed down a plateful of pork. Now Monique was a vegetarian. I hope you were polite, Robert signed. Duh. What, do you think I'm an ogre? I expect you to be a gracious guest. Whatever. Would you two cut it out? Melissa whispered as her elbow connected with Robert's abdomen. You may not gain position anytime the track is under caution, Miles continued by rote. If the track goes yellow in the final 10 laps, officials will determine if there is enough time to clear the problem and resume green flag racing. If not, we will extend the race by a number of laps necessary for. The words faded into the back of Robert's noggin. Little about these meetings had changed in the 15 years since he'd hung up his helmet and moved on with the next phase of his life. Hearing the words and seeing the boredom on the drivers' faces made it seem like yesterday, but the changes in his daughter reminded him how long it had been. Katie had been a grainy Rorschach test on an Ultra sound monitor when Robert decided to give up racing. Now she bought C-cup bras online and begged Robert and Melissa to let her get her navel pierced. And to think he'd worried about deafness hindering her development. A rustle in the back of the room snapped Robert out of his daze. He followed the fan's eyes to the opposite corner, where he was stunned to see Alabama's senior U.S. Senator, Howell Shellwank, pressing hands and blowing kisses to select constituents. Robert had met Shellwank a couple of times, not counting those silly committee hearings where everybody talked into microphones in a room smaller than Robert and Melissa's kitchen. The gentleman from Alabama had called him Red Ball and asked him a couple of racing questions in their private meetings. He'd also made some mind-numbing stump speech on congressional oversight of the Justice Department during the hearings. Shellwank had the perfect background for Washington. He'd been a radio talk show host in Montgomery when his predecessor, a land baron named Ole McDonald, was caught naked in Tacoma Park, Maryland, with a couple of hefty handcuffed co-eds, both of whom happened to be named Patty. Shellwank, thrice divorced himself for deviances still under seal, used his 100,000-watt pulpit to demand a clean sweep in the next election. The on-air line he uttered for a month was, McDonald had 2 obese patties and who knows how much special sauce. He also mocked McDonald with a parody of the president pro tem of the Senate recognizing the gentleman from a wham bam, thank you ma'am, When callers to Shellwank's program challenged the host to run for McDonald's seat, the talkmaster took up the charge, even though most of the calls for his candidacy were made in jest. If you're so god bleep smart, why don't you run? 3 terms later, Shellwank chaired the Regulatory Oversight Committee and served loud and proud on the Homeland Security and Senate Intelligence Committees. He appeared on cable news no fewer than 3 times a week and had the mobile numbers of the Sunday talk show hosts on speed dial. What's he doing here? Melissa whispered. Robert shrugged. Trolling for votes, I guess. Shellwank's presence and the potential disruption it might cause prompted Miles to wrap up the meeting with an "Any questions? Good" salute. He wisely sat down and turned the podium over to Barney Hart, the founder and pastor of Stockcar Outreach. Barney had been preaching to drivers, wives, crew chiefs, and a few semi-sober fans for 20 years. A Sunday morning praise the Lord ritual that had become as much a part of Stockcar Nation as 20-ounce beers and earplugs. 3 years ago, Barney's congregational numbers began to dwindle as drivers opted out of worship for a little quiet time before risking their lives at 180 miles an hour. Miles had taken care of this problem by seamlessly segueing the outreach service into the mandatory drivers meeting. No heathen would dare hop up from his chair once Barney put his hands on the lectern and said, "Let's open with prayer." Even Faduki Yamada, a second-year driver from Okinawa and devout Buddhist, stayed planted in his seat every Sunday. "God bless you, Miles," Barney said as he took his spot. "And God bless all of you on this beautiful day the Lord hath made." Robert never understood why preachers used King James diction on Sundays. He'd never heard Barney say, "Passest thou the ketchup" at the lunch counter. But when he stood in front of his sheep, the good Reverend never failed to whip out a "Lord hath made" or a "Blessed thou art." It's good to see all of you, and it's great to have an old friend and a lover of the Lord worshiping with us today. Everybody please join me in welcoming Robert Redding back to our services. Barney led the applause and everyone joined in. All the drivers turned in their seats to see Robert, who nodded and gave a quick shoulder, high wave. Jet didn't try to hide his chuckle. "And his wife Melissa," Barney said, clapping even harder when he realized he'd forgotten to acknowledge Mrs. Redding. "And, no, it can't be. Is that Katie Redding and Michael?" The applause intensified. "My, oh my, I can't believe how you've grown up before our eyes." Robert cut his eyes at his daughter. Katie couldn't hear herself groan, but that was no excuse. Barney put on a painted preacher smile and gave an exaggerated, "It's hard to believe" shake of his head. "I can't speak for anybody else," he said. "But Robert, I believe you're doing the Lord's work. Keep it up." Polite applause, golf claps, as Robert waved and said, "Thank you." Would this never end? Now I'd like to recognize another distinguished guest we have with us today by asking Alabama Senator Howell Shellwank to lead us in our opening prayer. Not only did no one clap as Shellwank marched forward, Robert heard someone in the back row say, "Oh, for fuck's sake." The good senator pressed no fewer than 10 palms in 6 paces. When he finally reached the podium, he greeted Barney with a full-fledged man hug that lasted a couple of seconds longer than everyone's comfort level. "Thank you, Barney," Shellwank said as he snatched the microphone like a bum going for a turkey leg. "It's a surprise and an honor to be before you this morning. Since I'm here, I want to welcome the world's greatest racers to the greatest state in the greatest nation in the history of the world." Robert tuned out after that. Shellwank prattled on for another 5 minutes before asking everyone to bow with him in prayer. Then he asked God to right the listing ship of American morality and give courage to those who spoke out for all things right and virtuous in this great land. He prayed for tax cuts, a flag-burning amendment, and victory in the next election cycle. When Robert snuck a peek at the drivers, he saw Junior mouth the question on everyone's mind. What the hell is he doing? Right before the obligatory, "In the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ we pray," Shellwank threw in an, "Oh, and please see to the safety of these brave drivers." Then he paused, hoping to create the kind of ecumenical tension that opened donors' pocketbooks. Unfortunately, Jimmy and the Coral Reefers picked that moment to lead thousands of fans in a chorus of, "Why don't we get drunk and screw?" Shellwank couldn't get the amen out fast enough. An hour later, Robert sat behind a pressboard desk on a scaffolding platform. He held an ABC microphone and was answering such inane questions as, "How does it feel to be back at the track?" He lied about how thrilled he was to be back in Alabama and claimed not to miss being behind the wheel. "I watched the talented Salem Cup drivers today, and I'm glad I don't have to trade paint with them," he heard himself saying. Another couple of questions on the standings and some general observations about downforce races like this one, and Robert felt like throwing the mic into the crowd and diving off the ledge. Terry the Cannon Gannon wrapped the session by saying, "Red Ball Redding, thanks for spending some time with us." To which Robert said, "My pleasure, Terry, thank you," without much enthusiasm. "Well, it looks like we've got company," Gannon said in the kind of apprehensive voice one used when crazy cousins showed up at the door. Robert turned in time to see Senator Shellwank crest the last step on the scaffolding and slip into a chair beside him. "It's Senator Howell Shellwank," Gannon said. What a surprise. Robert saw the producer shrug his shoulders and shake his head. Shellwank was not part of the pre-race script. "Great to be here, Terry. It's a great day here in the great and blessed state of Alabama. Just great." "Well, that's," Gannon caught himself before adding another great to the mix. "This is a refreshing change from Washington, I guess." Gannon cut a glance at the producer. Oh, it's not too different actually. We dent a lot of fenders on the Senate floor too. Shellwank slapped Robert on the back and laughed too loud. The producer twirled a finger. Time to wrap it up. Well, thanks for joining us today, Senator. Now let's go back to, thank you, Terry. And a special thanks to the Stockcar fans who support our attempts to rescue America from moral turpitude. Gannon cocked his head and stared at the senator like the RCA dog looking into the Victrola. A couple of seconds later, the producer whispered, Terry. And Gannon said, let's go down to Jason Priestley on Pitt Road. Shellwank put down his mic and was off the platform without so much as a goodbye. He cornered Robert at the bottom of the stairs, blocking the path back to Miles's golf cart. Redball, I have a word? No wasn't an option, so Robert put his hands in his pockets and waited. Shellwank moved within inches of Robert's face and said, I know you've heard about what happened in Mississippi the other night with that crazy eco-terrorist. Eco-terrorist? Crazy sumbitch had enough C-4 to take down a whole goddamn building. Yeah, I read something about that. Well, I would view it as a personal favor if you'd head down there and check things out. The eco-terrorists. I need you down there. Why? The Bureau's all over this. They don't need me, but I need you, Shellwank said. He put his hands on Robert's shoulders and leaned in until their foreheads almost touched. This is exactly the kind of incident we need to aggressively combat. Your buddies here are breaking ground in Mississippi on Tuesday. We can't let these wackos get away with shit like this. They haven't, Robert said. The wacko in question blew himself up. I need somebody like you down there. Somebody like me. Somebody high profile. You mean somebody who has a movie out about him. Somebody the public trusts. Trusts, Robert said, shaking his head. We have to send a tough message to those who threaten the peace. Threaten the peace. We can't have nutjob eco-terrorists trying to blow up bridges. Technically, it was a piling. The bridge isn't open yet. God damn it, Redball, do you know what I'm saying? Robert raised his hands. I hear you, Senator, and I agree. They can't get away with it. That's why the FBI is there. And why I want you to assist them in their investigation. Shellwank's grip on Robert's shoulders tightened. I know I can count on you. Further argument was futile. Robert was headed to Biloxi. The cart ride to the victory podium was testy. Miles asked Robert what the powwow with Shellwank had been about, and Robert said, like you don't know. Miles let it go, and they listened to Jimmy Buffett sing Hank Williams the rest of the short trip. Hey, good looking. What you got cooking? Melissa met them in front of the black and white checkered backdrop at the top of the victory podium. What's wrong? She said when she saw Robert's face. Looks like I'm going to Mississippi. Mississippi? Don't ask. They stood at attention and bowed their heads as Reverend Hal Palsy of Pell City United Methodist Church gave the invocation, and the choir from the Alabama Boys Ranch sang the national anthem. That was followed by an F-18 flyby. Only then did Robert's reason for being there roll round. The clipped voice of Stockcar announcer Dirk Manley boomed over the public address system. And now, for the most famous words in motorsports. Please give an Alabama Motor Speedway welcome to racing legend Robert Redball Redding. The crowd erupted in cheers. Robert grabbed a mic from a track official standing below him. Gentlemen, he said, start your engine.